Soybeans built the backbone of America's dinner table. Oil in the skillet, feed in the barn, protein in nearly every aisle. For decades, they flowed steady as the seasons. But that rhythm just broke. Exports, once our pride, are drying up. Ships that once carried U.S. beans to the world are leaving half empty. And when the cargo slows, the shock does not stop at the dock. It moves into chicken houses. It moves into egg cartons. It moves into the oil aisle at Walmart and the dairy case at Costco. Families won't see the cargo numbers. They will see the register ring higher. They will feel the quiet squeeze in meals that used to be affordable. And here's what matters most. 7 everyday foods are already caught in the fallout. We'll tell you what they are and why the change is only just beginning. Because this was never just about beans. The big picture. Before going into details, we need to see the big picture. In the 80s, soybeans meant exports. Ship after ship left American ports stacked with grain bound for Asia. In the 90s, soybeans meant cheap cooking oil. Bottles lined store shelves, steady and affordable filling fryers and kitchen pans across the country. But today the story has changed. Soybeans have become fuel. More than half of America's soybean oil now flows into renewable diesel plants feeding engines instead of families. That shift has turned the industry on its head. The process still begins the same. Farmers harvest the beans, send them to elevators, and from there the crop takes its path either shipped abroad or crushed at home. But the balance of where those beans go is no longer steady. When exports slow as they have this year, crushing plants run harder. The oil goes into tanks and the meal heads into feed. That new demand pattern means fewer beans are tied directly to the food aisle. For families, the change is quiet but powerful. Prices on the shelf no longer rise and fall only with weather or harvests. They are now tied to global fuel policy shipping routes and decisions made far beyond the farm gate. The soybean is still a crop, but it has become part of an energy system as much as a food system. That is why the smallest shift in this industry echoes through so many aisles. It is why shoppers feel pressure in foods they never thought about before. And the very first sign of that change shows up where the oil is bottled. Vegetable oil, once one of the most reliable items in the store, now tells the story of a crop caught between the kitchen and the fuel pump. One vegetable oil. That jug of vegetable oil used to be the cheapest thing in the cart, the kind of product you could buy without even looking at the price tag. A gallon sat on the shelf for weeks, waiting for pancakes, fried chicken, or Sunday donuts. It was reliable and steady. That steadiness is gone. Walk into Walmart or Costco today, and the oil aisle tells a different story. The bottles are still there, lined up in plastic and glass, but the numbers on the shelf tag move more often than they used to. Sometimes they dip with promotions, sometimes they rise without warning. And what used to feel like the rock of the pantry now feels like a warning light for the entire food system. Most families do not follow commodity reports or export charts. They just know when the oil costs more, the grocery bill shifts. What they cannot see is why. The change begins outside the store in places they will never visit. In fuel policy meetings, in shipping contracts, in refineries. For the first time, the oil in the frying pan is tied directly to the oil in the fuel tank. More than half of America's soybean oil now flows into renewable diesel and biodiesel. That demand keeps processors running at record levels even when harvests are large and exports weak. The result is simple: energy has stepped into the food aisle. A bottle of oil now has 2 masters, and the one with deeper pockets usually wins. The volatility shows up quickly. One week, USDA reports tighter stocks and traders push prices higher. Another week, a new refinery project announces expansion and futures tick up again. Even river levels can nudge prices as barges carry lighter loads. These signals are invisible to the average shopper, but they move silently into the price tags. That is why the category can look stable on paper while feeling unstable in the store. National data shows fats and oils as a whole a touch cheaper than last year. Yet mayonnaise and salad dressings are up. That contradiction is the reality of today's market. Averages hide the swings, but individual products bear the cost. When promotions vanish, the climb feels sharper. For families living on a fixed income, even a $1 shift in the oil jug means decisions about what else to leave out of the cart. The other change is psychological. People used to treat cooking oil like salt or flour an afterthought. Now it draws attention. Shoppers notice when it creeps higher, and they start to connect it to bigger worries about food security and inflation. The aisle has become a quiet reminder that stability is fragile. The larger forces will not go away. Renewable diesel plants are still growing. Trade competition with Brazil and Argentina still eats into U.S. exports. River systems still face low water seasons that disrupt transport. None of these are temporary weather flukes. They are structural, and structural changes do not unwind quickly. That is why vegetable oil deserves a second look. It is not just another grocery item. It is the first signal of how deeply soybeans are pulled between fuel and food. Every shopper can see it without reading a single government report. And every small jump on that shelf hints at the bigger pressures building underneath. The bottle of oil has become a messenger. It tells families that the old rules of grocery shopping have changed. It says stability is no longer guaranteed. And it prepares the way for the next foods because oil does not move alone. It drags mayonnaise, salad dressings, and fried foods with it. The aisle may look the same, but what it represents is very different. De mayonnaise. Calm yourself to face the truth first. Producers reported higher costs for making mayonnaise and dressings this summer. Their index rose week by week, signaling that the squeeze was building at the factory level. At the store, the national average showed only a modest climb, barely noticeable in a chart. But averages never tell the whole story. In reality, shoppers see it where it counts. Promotions disappear. Big tubs no longer carry the same discount. Small bottles edge up quietly. For some families, that quiet edge is loud enough. Picture a woman standing in the aisle. She sees the row of jars, the same labels she has trusted for decades. She knows the shelf almost by heart. But today she notices the price. It is higher than she remembers. Not enough to stop the cart, but enough to draw a sigh. She picks up the jar anyway. She thinks of her husband who eats sandwiches every day for lunch. She thinks of her children who will not touch tuna without it. She thinks of the potato salad her mother taught her to make. The jar goes into the cart even as she wonders what she will leave out to balance the bill. That sigh is the sound of trust bending. Mayonnaise has never been a luxury item. It was the safe bet, the reliable staple, the thing you could always afford. Its rise is not about $1 or $2. It is about the feeling that even the quiet products are no longer safe from pressure. The forces behind that sigh are quiet and hidden. In offices far from the grocery aisle, contracts are signed that shift the flow of beans across oceans. In conference rooms, fuel policies are written that decide where the oil will go. Barges move down shallow rivers, refineries expand their reach, and traders adjust their books. None of it is visible to her as she stands in front of the jars. Yet every one of those invisible hands presses gently on the number she sees at the shelf. That invisible weight makes mayonnaise more than a condiment. It is a symbol of how fragile stability has become. The jar is no longer just egg and oil. It is also policy decisions, global shipping lanes, refinery expansions. None of that shows on the label, but all of it is packed inside. Families feel the impact without ever knowing the mechanics. For older shoppers, the shift cuts deeper. They remember when mayonnaise was one of the cheapest ways to stretch a meal. They remember church suppers where deviled eggs fed dozens for pennies. They remember school lunches built around sandwiches with generous spreads. Those memories do not match today's slow creep in prices. The mismatch unsettles more than the wallet, it unsettles the sense of continuity. That's why a jar of mayonnaise now carries more meaning than it ever did before. It speaks to the slow erosion of certainty. It reminds families that even the most ordinary items can change under forces they cannot see. And it leaves them with choices that are not really choices at all. The sigh follows because the trade-off is real. For decades, mayonnaise was a sure thing. It was steady, affordable, and always there in the fridge, waiting to turn simple ingredients into a meal. That certainty has slipped away. What replaces it is not a sudden crisis, but a slow, steady drip of doubt. A jar that once carried only comfort now carries questions. Will it cost more next week? Will it still feel within reach next month? Each quiet rise in price plants a seed of uncertainty. And once doubt enters the kitchen, it does not leave easily. 3. Chicken. Chicken was supposed to be safe. The affordable meat, the fallback when beef and pork pushed too high. Families trusted it because it was steady, reliable, and everywhere. But that trust is breaking. And the reason isn't a mystery, it starts with soy. Every chicken you see in a store, every drumstick, every rotisserie bird, every frozen nugget is built on soy. Not because soy shows up on the label, but because it is in the feed. Soybean meal is the protein backbone of poultry diets. It is what turns chicks into broilers and layers into hens. And feed is not a side cost. For producers, it is more than half of what it takes to raise a flock. That simple fact ties the chicken aisle directly to the soybean market. When soybean meal rises, chicken follows. It may not happen overnight, but it is inevitable. The link is too tight to break. Right now, soybean meal sits near $280 a ton. On paper, that looks stable, but stability is deceptive. The number reflects crushers running at full capacity, pouring meal into feed mills day and night. It reflects exports sagging while domestic demand surges. And it reflects a balance that can tilt at any moment. One poor harvest in South America, one shift in export flows, one change in renewable fuel policy, and meal costs can lurch higher. When that happens, it does not stay in the charts. It lands on the price of chicken in Walmart and Costco. In the store, it looks like a choice. Breasts in one tray, thighs in another, wings in a bag, nuggets in the freezer, rotisserie birds glowing under the lamps. But behind the packaging, it is all the same bird. And every one of those birds was raised on soybean meal. The labels may differ, the cuts may differ, but the cost is chained to the same feed. This is why the price of chicken feels restless. National data shows poultry prices up about 3% compared to last year. That rise may sound small, but in a product as universal as chicken, it is heavy. For a mother buying 3 packs a week, that difference cuts deep into a budget. For an older couple living on a fixed income, the rotisserie bird they once relied on is no longer the deal it used to be. Chicken is the most consumed protein in America. More than beef, more than pork, more than fish. When a chicken moves, everyone feels it. And when the cause is soy, the pressure is not temporary. It is baked into the very structure of the market. Think of the scale. Billions of bushels of soybeans crushed into meal, billions of birds consuming it. Every bite of chicken at the dinner table is passed through the funnel of soy. It is invisible, but it is absolute. That connection means families are not just buying poultry. They are buying into the global soybean system with all of its volatility, competition, and uncertainty. This is what makes the chicken aisle dangerous ground. It looks like a place of choice breasts or thighs, whole bird, or parts fresh or frozen. But beneath that choice lies the same foundation, soy meal. And when that foundation shakes, all the options shake with it. Chicken was the safe bet. The meat families leaned on when other proteins drifted out of reach. But as long as soybeans remain under pressure, whether from fuel demand export shifts or crushing margins, chicken cannot escape. The link is too tight, too deep, too binding. So when you pick up a pack of chicken and notice the price a little higher than last year, remember this: you are not just buying poultry. You are buying soybeans crushed and processed, turned into meal, and passed through the feed trough. You are buying into a system where one crop decides the cost of America's most trusted meat. And if even chicken is no longer safe, then nothing is. 4 eggs. Be warned. Eggs may look steady today, but they are one of the most fragile foods in the grocery store. When pressure hits soybeans, it shows up quickly in the carton. And unlike other proteins, eggs have no backup plan. Every egg begins with feed. Laying hens must eat protein every single day to keep producing, and that protein comes from soybean meal. It is not optional. Farmers cannot cut the ration. They cannot switch overnight to something else. Soy is the backbone. Without it, the hens stop laying. That daily dependence makes eggs more exposed to soy markets than almost any other food. For producers, feed is the single largest cost. Reports from the nation's biggest egg company show more than half of expenses tied to feed. Every shift in soybean meal pricing, even a small one, ripples into the barns. A change in the cost of a ton of meal can mean millions across an industry that puts cartons on every shelf in America. Right now, soybean meal hovers near $280 a ton. On the surface, that looks calm. National egg prices are even down compared to last year after the storm of bird flu drove them to record highs. Shoppers see cheaper cartons and feel a little relief. But that calm is deceptive. Egg prices are always sitting on a knife's edge because the feed link never lets up. The risk is constant. If exports tighten supply, if crushers shift output, if global demand shakes the balance, soybean meal moves. And when soybean meal moves, the impact on eggs is faster than most people realize. A steer can take months to reach market. A flock of broilers grows in weeks, but eggs appear daily. Costs cycle into cartons almost in real time. That speed makes eggs the most sensitive aisle in the supermarket. Families sense it. They remember the spike of last year when eggs jumped higher than anyone thought possible. They may see lower prices now, but the memory of those empty shelves and costly cartons is fresh. And it reminds them how easily the fragile balance can break. Eggs are not just another protein. They are breakfast at the kitchen table. They are a dozen in the fridge, ready for baking or Sunday brunch. They are deviled eggs at Easter omelets on Saturday morning, hard-boiled eggs in a child's lunchbox. For generations, they were the cheapest way to put protein on the table. When they waver, it feels like more than inflation, it feels like disruption of tradition itself. That is the warning. Stability in eggs depends on stability in soy. And soy right now is under the same set of pressures pulling on oil chicken and more renewable fuel demand, shifting export routes, crushing margins stretched to the limit. Eggs cannot insulate themselves from that. They are tied to it daily, completely without exception. So when you see a carton priced a little lower than last year, do not mistake it for permanent relief. It is temporary calm on a fragile base. One more shock to soybeans and eggs will be among the first foods to react. Eggs are the canary in the coal mine, the first to wobble when the feed market stirs. And families who rely on them most, those stretching dollars, those counting on eggs, as the budget protein will feel it first. That is why a carton of eggs in the fridge carries more than breakfast. It carries a warning: when soy meal bends, the shell is the first to crack. And the cracks don't stop. They spread into the next aisle, straight into the milk and dairy case. 5 dairy foods. A dairy cow eats more than 100 pounds of feed every single day. Multiply that by herds of thousands, and the numbers become staggering. At the center of that ration is soybean meal. That scale makes dairy one of the most exposed foods in America to every swing in the soybean market. Dairy cows eat every single day. To produce milk at scale, their diets must be balanced with protein, and that protein comes from soybean meal. Corn provides the energy, but soy provides the protein that keeps cows producing consistently. Without it, yields drop. For dairy farmers, feed is not just one line on a budget. It is more than half of all production costs. And within that cost, soy is the critical lever. National data shows milk and dairy prices rising only 1 to 2% compared to last year. That seems modest, but averages mask the real strain. Cheese prices swing when exports surge. Butter climbs when domestic demand collides with tight cream supplies. Yogurt follows milk solids higher. Behind all of it sits feed, and behind feed sits soy. This is why dairy feels unstable even when charts show calm. Families may see milk holding steady, but the farm behind it is living on a knife's edge. Every delivery of feed is a bet that soybean meal will not spike. Every ton added to the ration locks the farmer deeper into the soybean market. And there is no way around it. A dairy cow eats more than 100 pounds of feed a day. Scale that across herds of thousands, and the exposure is massive. The connection means every glass of milk, every stick of butter, every slice of cheese is tied to soybeans crushed in plants across the Midwest. It means dairy shoppers are not just buying from the cow, they are buying from the global soybean system with all its volatility and uncertainty. That volatility is not theoretical. When renewable fuel plants expand, soybean oil demand surges. Crushers adjust, and the balance of oil and meal shifts. When weather cuts crops in Brazil or Argentina, global soybean flows tighten. When rivers run low, barge traffic slows and meal costs climb inland. Each of these events looks like a distant headline, but each one can raise the cost of milk at Walmart and Costco within weeks. For families, dairy is not a luxury. It is a weekly purchase woven into habits and health. Children drink milk at breakfast. Seniors rely on yogurt and cheese for protein. Buttercream and cheese fill recipes handed down for generations. That dependence makes even small shifts painful. A few percent on milk, a bigger rise in cheese, a jump in butter, these are costs that land in kitchens again and again. From gallons in the fridge to blocks of cheese in the freezer, the line is unbroken. Milk is not just milk. It is soybeans crushed, processed, and pushed through feed troughs until they reach the dairy case. And that means stability in dairy is only as strong as the next turn in the soybean market. Milk will always be on the shelf. Butter and cheese will always fill the case. But their price is never their own. They are chained to the feed trough, tied to soybeans, and carried along with every shift in the market. That quiet dependence is what families pay for, whether they see it or not. 6 pork. The pork in American kitchens does not stand alone. Every chop, every strip of bacon, every holiday ham is part of a chain that runs across oceans. And at the center of that chain is soy. The United States is one of the largest pork producers in the world. But it is also part of a global system where China, Europe, and other buyers shape demand. When soybeans shift, pork does not only follow at home, it follows abroad. That link makes pork one of the clearest examples of how the soybean market ties American families to decisions made thousands of miles away. It starts in the feed trough. Pigs cannot grow without protein, and that protein comes from soybean meal. For American hog farmers, feed represents the majority of their production costs. But they are not competing only with one another. They are competing with buyers overseas who purchase soy, and with crushers who decide how much meal stays home. That balance sets the price of pork before it even reaches the barn. For farmers, this means a constant squeeze. Feed costs are elevated while hog prices have not risen in step. Margins are thin, and in many cases negative. The industry's own reports show producers struggling to break, even not because demand for pork is weak in America, but because the cost of raising pigs is pinned to soybean markets shaped by forces far beyond U.S. borders. For shoppers, the result is subtle but steady. National data shows pork prices rising about 2 to 3% compared to last year. It is not a spike, but it is enough to make bacon feel more expensive than memory suggests, and enough to make ham less of a safe bet for gatherings. The pressure is not dramatic, but it is constant families paying more for pork because soybeans are priced in a global market. This is the irony of pork. It was once the affordable middle ground the meat families turned to when beef was too high. But soy has tied it to a system where affordability is no longer guaranteed. The pig in the American barn depends on soy grown in U.S. fields, crushed in domestic plants, and sold in markets that respond to weather in Brazil, demand in China, and trade flows across oceans. The scale is staggering. Billions of bushels of soybeans crushed into meal consumed by hogs around the world. The United States exports both soy and pork, and the two are inseparable. When soy shifts, hogs follow. When hogs move, families in America feel it in the cost of bacon, ribs, and ham. That is the global truth of pork. The choices in the meat aisle are shaped not only by farms in Iowa or North Carolina, but also by ships leaving Brazilian ports and contracts signed in Beijing. Families buying pork at Walmart or Costco are participating in a global system where soybeans decide what breakfast costs and where no market is ever fully in their control. 7. Beef. Beef is under strain. Prices are at record highs. The American cattle herd is the smallest since 1951, and the supply squeeze is tightening week by week. The cause reaches back to the same place as so many other foods: soybeans. Feed is the silent driver of cattle costs. To put on weight, cattle need steady protein, and that protein comes from soybean meal mixed with corn. When meal costs climb, feeder cattle prices climb in step. This year, those feeder prices are more than 30% higher than they were in January. The increase reflects not only the pressure of soy, but also the narrowing gap between what it costs to raise a steer and what it can sell for. Production is falling. Fewer fed cattle are coming to market, and non-fed slaughter has dropped as well. Each decline narrows the flow of beef into the system while demand has not eased. Families still buy ground beef, restaurants still sell steaks, and holiday tables still call for roasts. The result is a case where prices keep rising, sometimes past what customers once thought possible. The feed system itself is shifting. Archer Daniels Midland, one of the largest players in the market, has announced it will fold its U.S. feed mills into a joint venture with Alltech. The move consolidates the industry further, leaving farmers with fewer independent options to source meal. In a market already shaped by soy and corn, fewer supply lines mean less room to maneuver when costs rise. Global forces feed into the same cycle. China remains the world's largest pork buyer, but it also shapes soybean demand that reaches directly into cattle feed. Weather in Brazil and Argentina changes the flow of soy exports, altering U.S. supplies. Droughts in Australia or herd contractions in South America ripple into the American market, pressing costs higher. Soybeans are the common denominator tying together producers from multiple continents and steering the price of beef in American stores. The impact is visible across cuts. Ground beef is up double digits in many regions. Steaks cost more at the counter and more on the menu. Some restaurants are scaling back portion sizes or shifting specials, but the overall trend is upward. Beef, once the premium option that families saved for now, feels like a test of endurance. Rebuilding the herd will not happen quickly. Cattle cycles are long. Calves take years to reach market weight. USDA forecasts suggest that high beef prices could persist well beyond the next season as smaller herds take time to recover. Behind every steak and every hamburger patty lies the same quiet pressure: soybeans crushed into meal, moved through feed mills, and poured into troughs. The herd is shrinking. The feed is costly, and the global chain is strained. The story of beef today is not only about cattle, it is the limits of a system pulled tighter than it has been in decades. We have walked through the aisles together: oil, mayo, chicken, eggs, dairy, pork, and beef. Each one carries the mark of soybeans. Each one reminds us that food is never as simple as it looks on the shelf. But knowing the link is not just about worry, it is about wisdom. When we understand the chain, we see patterns others miss. We notice the quiet shifts. We prepare our households with calm, not panic. And we remind ourselves that pressure is not permanent. America's farms have weathered storms before. Markets rise, markets fall, and stability can return. The choices we make as consumers, buying wisely, wasting less, asking questions, help steady the ground beneath us. So let this be more than a warning. Let it be a step toward clarity. The foods may change, the prices may move, but better days are never out of reach.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.